Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya Namaskaram. Today I'm going to start with one or more questions that were asked in the comments on recent YouTube videos. The first one is, you keep telling us that if we don't rise as ego, we will experience ourselves as we actually are. This implies that we can subside as ego, experience ourselves as we actually are, and then rise again due to our vasanas. So my question is, can we subside as ego completely or enough to experience ourselves as we actually are, or is just being as we actually are only something we get to experience in the waking state when we have permanently annihilated ego? So that is the question. What this person refers to in the first sentence, when they say, you keep telling us that if we don't rise as ego, we will experience ourselves as we actually are. This is something that I often say, and it is what Bhagavan implies in verse 27 of Ulludunapadu. Of course, he implies it in so many other places, but particularly clearly in Ulludunapadu, verse 27. But before I begin to discuss that verse, what needs to be clarified, that is the state in which we do not rise as ego, there is of two kinds. As Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Upadesha Undiyar, dissolution of mind is of two kinds, laya and nasa. What is dissolved in laya will rise again. If its form dies, implying in nasa, it will not rise again. In other words, the mind can dissolve either temporarily or permanently. Permanent dissolution of the mind is manonasa, the annihilation of mind, whereas temporary dissolution of mind is manolaya. In both manolaya and manonasa, we do not rise as ego. And since we do not rise as ego, all that exists in that state is Sat-Chit, pure being awareness, which is what we actually are. And as pure, as Sat-Chit, we always know ourselves as we actually are. So if we don't rise as ego, yes, we do experience ourselves as we actually are. But even when we rise as ego, what we actually are, namely Sat-Chit, is always experiencing itself as it actually is. But though we always experience ourselves as we actually are, when we rise as ego, we seem to experience ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So our rising as ego is the problem. Sleep, coma, swoon, general anesthesia, Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, these are all examples of states in which we do not rise as ego, but these are all temporary states, so they're all manolaya. The difference, that is why we sometimes dissolve in manolaya and eventually will dissolve in manonasa. What is the difference between these two states? That is, in the states themselves, there are no differences, because when we don't rise as ego, no differences exist. However, in manolaya, ego hasn't, though we don't rise as ego, ego hasn't yet been annihilated, so we rise as ego again. The reason what distinguishes manonasa from manolaya is that manonasa is brought about by we as ego experiencing ourselves as Sat-Chit, which is what we actually are. as soon as we as ego experience ourselves as Satchit, we cease to be ego and remain as Satchit. And so that is the annihilation of ego. That is manonasa, annihilation of mind or eradication of ego. In Manolaya, we cease rising as ego for one reason or another, other than knowing us, experiencing ourselves as we actually are. So ego is not destroyed, so it rises again. Ego cannot be destroyed in Manolaya, because though in Manolaya we experience nothing other than ourselves as we actually are, egoism is absent, so it cannot be destroyed. So it's in the waking or dream state when we have risen as ego, but we as ego need to experience ourselves as we actually are. Since ego is a false awareness of ourselves, as soon as we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, we as ego will cease to exist. So when Bhagavan talks about the state in which we do not rise as ego, he is referring to manonasa, the state in which we never rise as ego. So what he says in verse 27 of Ulladu is, this is a very beautiful verse. He begins by saying, Nanudiyadu ullanilai, namaduvai ullanilai, which means the state in which I is without rising is the state in which we are as that. That here refers to Brahman. So we cannot experience ourselves as Brahman simply by meditating, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. Because what is meditating, I am Brahman, is ego. So we've already risen as ego, and we must rise as ego in order to meditate, I am Brahman. So that is not our experience. So in order to experience ourselves as Brahman, Brahman is that pure being awareness, Satchit. In order to experience ourselves as such, we need to be without rising as ego. Then in the next sentence he says, and this is the sentence where he makes it clear, but what he is referring to when he says the state in which I does not rise is not a state of manolaya, a temporary state in which I does not rise. He's referring to the permanent state, as he makes clear in the next sentence. In the next sentence he says, Nan udikum tanamadei nadamul, nan udia tanirape savadu evan. That means without investigating the place from which I rises, how to reach the destruction of oneself in which I does not rise. So here he talks about tan irape. Irape means destruction. Irapu means destruction. Irape is the accusative form of it. So when he says how to reach, that means how to achieve that the annihilation of oneself, the state in which I permanently doesn't rise. He doesn't say permanently, but that's of course implied. Once we are destroyed, when he talks about destruction of oneself, he obviously means destruction of ego, because what we actually are can never be destroyed. It's only ego, because ego is unreal, ego can be destroyed. So the state in which ego is destroyed is the state in which we do not rise as I. How to achieve that without investigating the place from which I rises? So here he makes it clear, but without self-investigation, we cannot achieve that annihilation of ourself, which is the permanent state of non-rising of I. When he says without investigating the place, tanam is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word sthanam, which literally means place, without investigating the place from which I rises. What does he mean by place? Obviously, he's not using the word place literally. He's using it metaphorically. The place where I rises is the source from which we rise as I. But from where do we rise as I? We rise as I every morning when we wake up from sleep, we rise as I. Every time we begin to dream, we rise as I. So we rise as I from sleep. So the place where I rises is that which alone exists in sleep. And that is Satchit, the pure being awareness, the awareness of our own being, I am. So that is the place from which I rises. So without investigating that place from which I rises, in other words, without investigating the pure I am, which is the place from which we rise as ego, how can we achieve the annihilation of ourself in which I here means ego, does not rise? And then in the third sentence, he says, Saramo tanadu am tanile nippadu evan. Saramo means without reaching. That implies what he's, that's referring to the previous sentence in which he says how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. So without reaching implies here, without achieving the annihilation of oneself, how to stand or how to abide in tanile, the state of oneself, in which one is tanadu, in which one is that. So without achieving that annihilation of ourself, how to stand or abide firmly in our own state in which we are that. That is the implication. So when we do not rise as I, we are thereby knowing and being what we actually are. But in order to cease rising as I permanently, we as ego need to know and be what we actually are. As soon as we as ego experience ourselves as pure Satchit, we thereby cease to be ego, because pure Satchit is what we actually are, whereas ego is a false awareness of ourself. Awareness of ourself as something other than what we actually are. So when we experience ourselves as we actually are, that is when we as ego experience ourselves as we actually are, ego is thereby annihilated. As I said, in Manolaya, ego subsides first, and then what remains is ourself as we actually are, which always experiences itself as it actually is. So ego is not thereby destroyed, because ego has subsided first, and then only the experience of ourself as we actually are remains. In the case of Manonasa, before ego subsides, it experiences itself as it actually is, and thereby it is destroyed. So coming back to the question, if we don't rise as ego, we'll experience ourselves as we actually are. Yes, that is correct. This implies that we can subside as ego, experience ourselves as we actually are, and then rise again due to our vasanas. Yes, in sleep, for example, we as ego subside, but though what remains when we subside is the pure being awareness, that is experience of ourselves as we actually are. So yes, we can subside as ego and rise again, but that is only the state of Manolaya, because we as ego didn't experience ourselves as we actually are. The experience of ourselves as we actually are is what remained when ego had subsided. So ego rises again. To say that we rise again due to our vasanas is not quite correct, though it is often explained in this way, because the vasanas cannot exist independent of ego. Since ego doesn't exist in Manolaya, it's completely dissolved in Manolaya, the vasanas are not there. Ego rises again because it hasn't been destroyed. And so as soon as ego rises, all its vasanas arise with it, and it wanders under the sway of its vasanas. Bhagavan says this in the 8th paragraph of Nana. He says, when we're referring to pranayama, even by pranayama, the mind will subside. But so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana comes out, the mind will also come out and wander under the sway of its vasanas. But it wanders under the sway of its vasanas only after we've risen as ego. So we can't say that we rise due to vasanas. We rise because we haven't been destroyed. And it's the nature of ego to rise. Though ego cannot rise for long. After some time we get tired, and so we subside again in sleep. And then this person goes on to say, so my question is, can we subside as ego completely or enough to experience ourselves as we actually are? Yes, well, whenever we subside as completely as when we as ego subside completely, what remains is experience of ourselves as we actually are, but that doesn't annihilate ego. We need to experience ourselves as we actually are, and thereby subside as ego. Or is just being, or just being as we actually are, only something we get to experience in the waking state when we have permanently annihilated ego? When we permanently, that is, the 3 states of waking, dream, and sleep, exist only in the view of ego. So when ego is annihilated, there's no waking state remaining for us to experience. But in order to annihilate the ego, it is possible only in waking or dream. We cannot annihilate ego in sleep because ego doesn't exist in sleep. The state of just being means the state of being without rising as I. And in order to achieve that state of being without rising as I, in such a way that we never rise again, we need to investigate ourselves, the source from which we have risen as ego. In other words, we need to investigate the pure I am, and thereby annihilate ego, as Bhagavan implies clearly in the 2nd sentence of verse 27. Without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise? That's obviously a rhetorical question. The clear implication is that we cannot reach the annihilation of ourself in which I does not rise without investigating the place where I rises. In other words, without investigating our source, which is our own being, the pure being awareness, Sat Chit. Without investigating that, we cannot know ourselves as we actually are, and thereby annihilate ourselves as ego. So I hope referring to this verse and explaining this verse adequately clarifies this. Though it's true, I often say if we don't rise as ego, we'll experience ourselves as we actually are. What I'm referring to there, as Bhagavan is referring to in verse 27, is the state in which we permanently cease rising as ego, what he refers to as tanirape, the destruction of oneself. That is our aim. But Manolaya, it happens anyway. Every day we experience Manolaya when we fall asleep. So achieving Manolaya is not a worthwhile aim. That's why Bhagavan said the only real samadhi is Sahaja Samadhi. Sahaja Samadhi is just another name for our real state in which we do not rise as ego, in which we just are, in which we remain as we actually are. We know, if we know and are what we actually are, that is the state of Sahaja Samadhi. That, according to Bhagavan, is the real Samadhi. Any other Samadhi, such as Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, is just a temporary state. Therefore, whatever is temporary is not real. So it is just a state of manolaya. There's one other question I wanted to answer also. That is, someone recently wrote a comment on a video. I think in that video I was explaining that knowing anything other than ourselves is a tripartite knowledge. That is, it involves a triputi. Triputi means the three factors of knowledge, of knowing anything other than ourselves. That is, when we know something other than ourselves, we are the knower or subject. What we know is the thing known or the object. But in order to know that thing, there must be a means of knowing it. So we know some things by seeing them. We know other things by hearing them. We know other things by testimony. We hear from others. We learn about history and so many things which we don't actually experience, but we believe the testimony, but we believe what we read in the history books or what we're taught in the history classes. And so we come to know that 200 years ago there was such and such a war, and such a kingdom was fighting such and such kingdom. We know all these. There are so many means by which we know things. But so the question that was asked, the comment was, surely self-knowledge requires a means of knowledge, just as ego-based knowledge also requires a means of knowledge. Otherwise, what is the point of Ramana's teachings, etc.? Because I think in that video I had said, but though to know anything other than ourselves requires a means of knowledge, like seeing or hearing or logical inference or testimony or whatever. There's so many different means of knowledge. But to know ourselves does not require any means of knowledge. So that is what the question is referring to. My answer is, knowing anything other than ourselves is not natural to us. Why is it not natural to us? Because we never know anything else permanently. Whatever else we know it for some time, and when we don't know it. We didn't know it previously, we know it now, and we're not going to know it in future. So it's not knowing anything other than ourselves is not natural to us. Because it's not natural to us, we need a means to know such thing. Whereas knowing ourselves is natural to us. There is never a moment when we do not know ourselves. So we do not need any means to know ourselves other than just being ourselves. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadesha Undiyar, Tanai iritale tanne aridalam. Being oneself alone is knowing ourselves. Because what we actually are is Satchit, pure being awareness. Satchit knows itself just by being itself. So in order to know ourselves as Satchit, we need to be Satchit. So we don't, because what we actually are is awareness, and awareness is always aware of itself. So awareness doesn't need any means to know itself. To know anything other than ourselves, we need a means. To know ourselves, we don't need any means. Just by being ourselves, we are knowing ourselves. So why is it we don't seem to know ourselves now? Well, even now we do know ourselves in the sense that we know that I am, but we don't know what I am. The reason we don't know what I am is that we now know ourselves as something other than what we actually are. We know ourselves as I am this body, I am this person. That is not what we actually are. So that false awareness, I am this body, is what covers over and obscures the real awareness of ourselves as we actually are. But even when we know ourselves as I am this body, we don't cease to know I am. And I am is what we actually are. That is, I am is the pure being awareness. That is what we always actually are. So there's not a moment when we do not experience being awareness, but now we mix that being awareness, that Satchit, we have mixed and conflated it with adjuncts as I am this body. So it's called chit jada granti. It's the knot that that binds together chit and jada. Of course, chit is never bound, but in the view of ego, chit seems to be bound to the body. It's conflated with the body. We take ourselves, the awareness, to be this body, which is jada, which is non-aware. So what is the means by which we can know ourselves? As Bhagavan says in verse 579 of Guru Vachaka Kovai, Bhagavan expresses it very beautifully. Upayamum tane, upayamum tane, abedama kanga ave. That means the upaya means the aim or goal, and upaya means the means or path. So the goal is only oneself, and the path is only oneself. Know them to be non-different. That is, since the goal is only ourself, just being as we actually are, that is our goal, we cannot reach that goal by any means other than just being as we actually are. So we ourselves are the goal, we ourselves are the means. What he implies here is that we can know ourselves only by just being ourselves. That is what I was referring to in my answer to the previous question when I was talking about verse 27 of Uludunabdu, which is, if we think about it, it's very closely related to what Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadesha. In verse 26 of Upadesha, he says, no, being oneself alone is knowing oneself. In verse 27 of Uludunabdu, he says, the state in which I is without rising is the state in which we are that. When he said the state in which we are that, we are always that, but we don't always experience ourselves as that. So the implication is, in order to experience ourselves as that, as Brahman, we need to be without rising as ego. So it's not by doing anything that we that we know ourselves. It's just by being as we actually are. Since being as we actually are, since our being is not other than ourselves, knowing ourselves is not a tripartite knowledge. There's not a separate knower, a separate object known, and a separate means of knowing. In the case of self-knowledge, the knower is ourself. What we know is ourself. And the means by which we know ourself is ourself. That is, our very nature is to know ourself. So I hope that adequately answers that question. Chris, do you want to now ask the questions that
sure, yeah, the ones
being asked?
Email, yes, sure. If you could please, question from Michael. If you could please discuss in the next session, if one commits suicide, is it the ego that takes the decision, or is it one's true self, or is it just according to prarabdha?
Our true self doesn't decide anything. Our true self is just pure being awareness. So if we commit suicide, committing suicide is an action. Any action we do, there are two things that drive us to act. One is the vast majority of actions we do under the sway of our vasanas. So those actions are called agamya. There are certain actions we do in accordance with prarabdha. Here, there's one point to clarify here. People often say, is this action, how can I know whether this action is prarabdha or agamya? Prarabdha is not action. Prarabdha is not a karma, it's a karma pala. Though it's referred to as a karma, but that in that context, karma is short for karma pala. Karma pala means the fruit of action. That is when we get the actual actions of the agamya. Those agamya bear fruit. The fruit are stored in what is called sanchita, And from that sanchita, Bhagavan or God or Guru, whatever you want to call it, or he who is for that, as Bhagavan put it in the note for his mother, selects those fruit that will be most conducive to our spiritual development and allots those fruit for us to experience in this lifetime. So the prarabdha is what we are given to experience. However, in order to experience what we are destined to experience, certain actions are necessary on our part. So whatever actions are necessary for the prarabdha to unfold, we will be made to do those actions. So as Bhagavan said in the first sentence of a note he wrote for his mother, Avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angangiridu artavipan. Avarava prarabdha prakaram means in accordance with the prarabdha of each one, adakanavan, he who is for that, referring to God or Guru, Angangirandu, being there. That means being in each place, implying being in the heart of each one of us. Artavipan will cause to dance. So that what he implies by that is that we will be made to do whatever actions of mind, speech, and body are required in order for our prarabdha to unfold. So we can't say such actions are prarabdha. Such actions are ones we are made to do by God in accordance with our prarabdha. So in the case of suicide, well, before I come to suicide, any action, we cannot easily say which action is agamya and which is in accordance with prarabdha. That is, which actions we're made to do by God and which actions we're doing under the sway of our vasanas. We can't easily distinguish it, because in many cases, even though an action is an action we're made to do by God in accordance with our prarabdha, we are also doing it under the sway of our will. That is, many of the things that happen to us are things that we like. So we make effort to achieve those things, but we cannot achieve those things unless it is our prarabdha. So if it's our prarabdha to achieve those things, we will achieve them. But we also made effort for that. So we made the actions we did in order to achieve that thing. There's so many examples we can give. For example, if it's our destiny to become a doctor, for example, we have to, in order to become a doctor, you have to study, you have to pass exams and all these things. Because if it's our destiny to be a doctor, we'll be made to do those actions in order to become a doctor. So those actions are actions we were studying and were writing the exams and passing the exams, everything. That is actions we're made to do in accordance with prarabdha. But most people who become doctors also become doctors because they want to become doctors. So those actions that led to their becoming a doctor were not only actions that they were made to do by God, they were also doing those actions under the sway of their vasanas. So it's like that. That's a major thing. Becoming a doctor is a major that affects a large part of a person's life, because that's their profession and they earn and all these things. So that's a major thing. But even minor things, if it's our destiny to enjoy a tasty meal today, some action will be necessary on our part. Someone may cook for us, but even if someone cooks for us, we still have to put the food in our mouth. But we also usually when we are served a tasty meal, we eat it with desire. We like to eat that tasty food. So the action of eating that food, or in some cases we may have to prepare the food ourselves, the action of preparing it and eating it, that may be actions we're made to do in accordance with prarabdha, but it's also actions we're doing under the sway of our will. So we can't easily distinguish. since many actions we do are actions that we do in accordance with prarabdha, and therefore actions that we're made to do by God, they're also actions that we're doing under the sway of our vasanas. To the extent that we do any action under the sway of our vasanas, that action is an agamya, whether or not it is an action that God is also making us do. So in the case of suicide, we obviously, it may in some cases be someone's prarabdha to commit suicide. I don't, it may be it may be a person prarabdha for their life to be terminated earlier, and for that the action they're made to do by God is to commit suicide. And we can't say that's impossible, but I think we should assume that if when someone commits suicide, they do so, it's a choice they make. They may make that choice for so many reasons, due to depression, due to mental illness, due to stress in life. Maybe they had earned a lot of money and then suddenly lost all their money and were bankrupt or something. There may be so many reasons that drive a person to suicide. But when a person commits suicide, in almost all cases, they are committing suicide because that is what they choose to do. So they're doing it under the sway of their vasanas. It is best to assume, but if we are faced with the choice whether to commit suicide or not, if we decide to commit suicide, that is agamya, because we have decided, it's our choice. In the Path of Sri Ramana, in the final chapter of the supplement to the Path of Sri Ramana, what used to be called Part 2, there's a chapter on karma. Sadhu Om gives a nice rule of thumb there. Of course, this isn't always going to be the case, but it's a good principle to live by. We should assume that any good actions we do, we are doing in accordance with those actions that we're made to do by God. So we shouldn't claim credit for the good actions we do. Oh, I've done such and such a good action, I've done so much charity and everything. If we think like that, that'll just strengthen the ego. So it's best to assume that any good action we do, we are doing it only by the grace of Bhagavan. Any bad action we do, we shouldn't say, oh, I did this bad action, but I was made to do it by God. I was made to do it by Bhagavan. No, we should take responsibility for the bad actions we do. We should assume that whatever bad actions we do, our actions are our own agamya. If we live in such a way, that'll we are thereby taking responsibility for our actions. We are not claiming credit for the good actions, but we are taking responsibility for the bad actions. Obviously, committing suicide is not a good action, it's a bad action. So we should take responsibility for that. We should assume that if we decide to commit suicide, that will be agamya, and we will have to suffer the consequences of that. We've been given this body for a purpose. The purpose of this body is enabled us to progress on the spiritual path. If we willingly kill this body, that is a great sin. I mean, it's killing any creature is a great sin. Even if the creature we kill is the one we take ourselves to be, it is still a sin. So we should take full responsibility for that. Sadhu Om actually says something more about that. He says, just like we should assume our bad actions we are responsible for, the good actions, they're God's responsibility, because of his grace that we do the good action. Likewise, if someone does a bad action to us, we should accept that. That is our prarabdha. So they are just instruments of our prarabdha. Whereas if someone does something good to us, we should take it. That is their agamya. That is, they have chosen to do something good for us. We should feel indebted to them. So we shouldn't We shouldn't resent the bad things that people do to us, because we should accept them as the fruit of our past karmas. But we should, if someone does some good to us, we shouldn't say, oh, that's the fruit of my past karma, so I don't have to be grateful. No, we should be grateful to those who do good for us. We should assume that they have done good to us just out of the kindness of our heart. We shouldn't take that to be prarabdha. Of course, this won't always be the case, but this is a good principle to live by. The bad we do, we are responsible for. The good we do, God is responsible for. The bad that happens to us, that is, God is giving us the fruits of our past action. The good things that are done to us, that others do to us, we have to be grateful to them for that. That's the reason Sadhu Om gives that, explains it in this way, is that if we take such an attitude, that will help to purify our mind. We won't feel proud about the good things we do. We won't try to shirk responsibility for the bad things we do. We will be grateful to the good things that others do to us. We won't be angry with others who do bad to us. We'll take it. If someone else does bad, if someone does bad to me, then that's the fruit of my past karmas. I shouldn't blame them. I'm the one who's responsible. But if they do good to us, we shouldn't say, oh, that's the fruit of my past karmas. We should feel this person has done some good to me out of the kindness of their heart, therefore I should be grateful to them. So coming back to the question of suicide, it's always best to assume suicide is an action that we choose to do, and therefore we are responsible for it. And because committing suicide is a bad action, a sin, we would be well advised not to commit suicide. It's never a good idea to commit suicide, because it will always lead to can only lead to bad consequences. We commit suicide in order to try to avoid the suffering that this life is giving us, but we can't avoid what is destined to happen. If we kill this body, for the rest of the prarabdha of this body will be suffering in some other state. So suicide is never a good idea. I hope that answers that question adequately.
So the next question is, I was watching a 2018 video discussion on the topic Nanya, paragraph 4. In there, Michael mentioned that the baby who is wanting breastfeeding from a mother is an ego. My question is, the baby has no identification of I. Do you think it's just the nature of living organism, in this case a baby, that it needs food for its survival, like a living organism's instinct, just as animals that need to eat?
I believe there are some psychologists who say the ego doesn't develop till a certain stage in life, but that is because they don't understand what ego is. If we experience anything other than ourselves, we who are experiencing that are ego. So a newborn baby definitely experiences things. It experiences hunger. It experiences desire for breastfeeding. So it is an ego. The person who asked this question said, the baby has no identification of I. This is a bit of a confused way of putting it. That is, ego is not an identification of I. Ego is the I that identifies itself with something other than itself. So as ego, we identify ourselves with a body. We experience ourselves as I am this body. So ego is the I that experiences itself as I am this body. So we cannot experience anything other than ourselves without experiencing ourselves as I am this body. As Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Uludunapadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. So we cannot, form means, doesn't mean just, he's not just talking about physical forms. All objects or phenomena are forms. That is, anything that can be distinguished in any way from any other thing is a form. So we cannot experience anything other than ourselves without experiencing ourselves as a form. So that form is, the form that we experience ourselves as is this body. And as Bhagavan clarifies in the next verse, verse 5, the body is not just, doesn't, in this context, doesn't just mean the physical form of the body. It means all the 5 sheaves. That's the physical form of the body, the annamaya kosha, the life that animates that body, the pranamaya kosha, and the mind, intellect, and will that function within that body. That is the Manomaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, and Anandamaya kosha. These are what we collectively experience as I. So Bhagavan refers to all 5 of these as body. So in the next second sentence of verse 5, he says, therefore all 5 are included in the term body. And one other point to clarify here, the person wrote, the baby who is wanting a breast, he said, Michael mentioned that the baby who is wanting a breastfeeding from a mother is an ego. It is not correct to say the baby is an ego. That is, the I that experiences itself as I am this baby is ego. That is, the baby is just a body. The body is jada. What is wanting, what is desiring breastfeeding is ego, which is that ego is aware of it, of that baby body as itself, as I. That obviously the baby doesn't know any language, so it doesn't verbalize saying I am this baby, I am this body, but that is the experience of the baby is I am this body. It experiences itself as this body. And because it experiences itself as the body, the hunger of the body it experiences as I am hungry. And therefore it desires the source of food, which is from the mother's breast. I hope that answered that question adequately. Just one more thing about this. He's it's just the nature of living organisms, in this case a baby, but it needs food for its survival. Yes, it is the nature of living organisms, but certainly in any organism that is aware, that is conscious of its existence, is an ego. That anything that is aware of anything other than itself is an ego. That is, the organism isn't the ego. There is an ego that experiences itself as that organism and therefore desires food for survival. And like an organism's instinct, yes, instincts are desires which we have when we identify ourselves as a body. So, what are the other questions, Chris?
Right, so I'll read this and then there is a sort of follow-up later on, but let me just start with this. I've been reading the notes you took during Sadhu Om's stay. The paramount importance of self-attention is truly impressive. I'm gaining a lot of valuable insights for my practice and enjoying it. Do you have a complete copy available on your website, or could you perhaps share the full content with me via email? Namo Ramanaya.
Yeah. The notes I took at that time were very rough notes. So I used those notes as a basis for those articles that I write. So what I write in those articles are not the exact words of Sadhu Om, but those notes are sufficient to remind me of the type of answers that he gave. So I don't claim that what is in those articles is 100% accurate. It's certainly not exactly what Sadhu Om said, but it's the type of thing he used to say. And the dates are given there. That's from the notebook, because I made the notes under particular dates. So, but often I expand on the date notes, because I took the notes are very, very are very brief. They're just reminders to me. But and of course I can't remember exactly what was said on some day nearly 50 years ago, but I remember the type of things that the type of explanations that Sadhu Om gave. So I developed the notes into the type of explanations he gave. So it's an ongoing process. For every quarter, I'm asked to write to provide a new article, and I do it based on those notes. So I have a complete copy of everything I've done so far, which I think it's been going on for, I think it's about 51 installments or something now. I can't remember exactly. So I've got a copy of those, which I share with anyone who asks for it. So if someone wants a copy of those, I can certainly share it if they contact me.
Thank you.
This is a follow-up to the question I've just read. Did Sadhu Om discuss his experiences on the final day of Bhagavan's Mahasamadhi? Did he mention seeing a comet pass over Arunachala at that time? Please share any details you may have. Sightings of a comet were reported from North India and Madras around that time. Namo Ramanaya.
Yes, what he told me, at that time, with many other devotees, he was sitting in the veranda of Matrabhuteshwara temple, facing the Nirvana room. And at that, they were singing Aksharamamlai, and I think at that time, if I remember correctly, the verse they were singing, I think it was Pain Godiyanan Patrindrivadamul Patrukobdaika Arunachala. Oh, Arunachala, be the support so that I don't, so that I'm not like a creeper without a support. So while they were singing that verse, what Sadhu Om saw, he saw a flash. He took it to be that someone in the Nirvana room was taking a picture of Bhagavan. It looked to him like the flash of a flash photography. He didn't see the camera, but he just saw from that room, he just saw suddenly a bright flash of light. He obviously couldn't see Bhagavan because he was sitting outside on the veranda and there were so many people around. All he saw was from the door of that Nirvana room, he saw a bright flash. And a few moments later, people were crying, see a comet in the sky. They were referring to that. And when he looked, he then saw because he was near the front of the veranda, he could just see the comet going towards the top of the hill.
Thank you.
The next question, please can you ask Michael, can the devotional songs when sung with love and sincerity be like thinking of the I, somehow alternative to thinking of the I meditatively? Somewhere Michael says that Bhagavan says, if the name of God is thought of sincerely and meditatively, it can lead to the Atma. In short, can the songs be alternative to Atma-vichara? Thank you.
Nothing is an alternative to Atma-vichara. Atma-vichara means fixing our mind on ourselves. The songs can be an aid to that, particularly if we understand what Bhagavan sometimes says explicitly, like in verse 2 of Arunachala Pancharatnam, he says, you dance in the heart as I. And in so many other verses, he talks about Arunachala shining in the heart. So the clear implication of many of the verses is that Arunachal is not only what appears externally in the form of a hill, it is also what is shining in our heart as eye. So if we bear in mind while reciting these that Arunachal is what is shining in our heart as eye, the mere thought of Arunachal, recitation of these things will be constantly reminding us to turn our attention back to I. But if we don't turn our attention back to I, we can't say it's Atma-vichara. It's Atma-vichara only when we turn our attention back to ourselves. And for that, particularly if that is, Bhagavan's words have their own power. Even if we don't understand the words, these words have, like mantras, they have their own power. But particularly if we understand the meaning of the verses and recite them with understanding and with the remembrance that Arunachal is that which is shining in the heart as eye. In fact, Murugan says it very explicitly in his in the Pairam he wrote Vakshamlai. He, in the last line of the verse, he says it's a 4-line verse. The last line he says, he takes some words from the first verse of Aksharamlai. Arunachala mena ahame arivodu. Arivodum arvar shivanula alvare. Those who go deep, who sink deep with the understand, who taking this as a refuge, who go deep with the understanding that Arunachal, what is called Arunachal is I, they will become the rulers of Shivaloka. Who is the ruler of Shivaloka? Shiva. So becoming the ruler of Shivaloka means they become Shiva themselves. So if we recite these verses with the understanding that Arunachal is what is shining in our heart as I, and thereby use these verses as a support to us in turning our attention back to I, then we will become Shiva himself. The Jiva, we will cease to be Jiva and will become Shiva. That means we will cease rising as I and remain as pure Satchit. So these verses are very, very powerful verses. They're a very great aid, but we should never think of anything as a substitute for self-investigation. It's only if we understand that Arunachal is I and thereby try to use these verses as a support to turn our attention back within, then only that is Atma-vichara. As Bhagavan says in Nana, Atma-vichara, what is Atma-vichara? He said the name Atma-vichara is only for always keeping the mind on oneself. So keeping the mind on ourselves means keeping our attention on ourselves. That alone is Atma-vichara. Nothing is a substitute for that. The Arunachal Stuti Panchakam and all of Bhagavan's verses are a great support to help us, but we have to turn our attention back to ourselves. As Bhagavan says in the 12th paragraph of Nana, just like the prey that is caught in the jaws of a tiger can never escape, so those who have been caught in the glance of Guru's grace will surely be saved and will never be forsaken. So he gives us a great assurance there, but he also adds a warning. Eninum guru kartya varipadi tavaradu nadikavendum. Nevertheless, it is necessary to follow without fail in accordance with the path shown by Guru. The path shown by Bhagavan is turning our attention within. Even in Aksharamlai, it's very clearly stated what Bhagavan reveals what Arunachal taught him. Obviously, Arunachal didn't teach in word. Arunachal taught in silence, but Bhagavan puts into words what he learned from Arunachal in silence, which is tirambiyaham, turning within. Tane dinamaha kankan, see yourself daily with the inner eye. Terium, it will be known. Thus you said, my Arunachala.
You want the next question?
Yes.
Okay. Regarding our lives and relationships with family, friends, and the world, for example, I have a conflict with my sister. Should I say something about how I feel? I can't say there is no one there. It's not my experience yet. And also, I don't want to use the teaching to avoid the problem. So how do I address and open up about it while being true to the teaching?
It's very difficult to. Bhagavan didn't tell us do this, don't do that. Bhagavan's teachings are about subsiding. So there's so many, when we rise as ego and experience ourselves as a body, we experience ourselves as one among so many people in this world. And there's so much scope for conflict and disagreements and competition and everything. We have to act appropriately in this world. So sometimes it may be necessary. If someone, for example, is doing something wrong, if they're hurting other people, it may sometimes be necessary to tell them. So we have to outwardly act appropriate to the situation, but inwardly we should try to be detached. We should try to be aloof from it. So even if, supposing we see someone doing something bad, and we think that by telling them, we may be able to dissuade them from doing that, by all means tell them, try to dissuade them, but we shouldn't be attached. We shouldn't. We as Krishna says in the Gita, you have the adhikara, you have the right to the action, not to the fruit thereof. So whatever actions we do, we should do it because we feel it's the right thing to do. We should not be attached to whatever. We shouldn't do it with the expectation this will produce a certain result, because sometimes we do something in good faith and it sometimes has a complete opposite effect. So we shouldn't be the fruit of our action, that's in Bhagavan's hands. So if you feel it's appropriate to say something to your sister to try to smooth the relationship or whatever it is, by all means say something. It may or may not work. If it doesn't work, you should be you shouldn't be perturbed. If it doesn't work, if it does work, you shouldn't be elated. Either way, the fruit is in Bhagavan's hands. So whatever you consider to be appropriate, do what you consider to be appropriate according to the situation. Often we're in situations in life we don't really know what is the appropriate thing to do. So we try to use our judgment to do what we consider the most appropriate. We try to avoid causing harm and try, where possible, to do some good. But that's all we can do. We can try our best, leave the result to Bhagavan. If it is your destiny that your relationship with your sister should become more amicable, it will happen. If it's your destiny that relationship should become worse, it will happen. So we've got no control over that. But when we're faced with situations in life, we should act in the way that seems to us to be most appropriate, but with the attitude, this is what I feel is correct, but Bhagavan, it's all this is in your hand. Whatever fruit you want to give for my action, I'm happy to accept whatever fruit you give. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question. Sadhu Om used to say, but as Bhagavan said, knowing ourself is very difficult. Sorry, knowing ourself is very easy. What is very difficult is living in this world, because there are so many people. We can't live in this world without getting into conflict with others. Even for Bhagavan, Bhagavan wasn't in conflict with anyone, but there were people who were in conflict with Bhagavan. When he was living on the hill, there were sadhus who were jealous of him because many people were coming to him and they felt he's taking away all their all their customers, well, not literally customers, but those people who should come and worship them and offer them whatever. Why are all these people are going to this young boy? So there were sadhus who were very jealous of Bhagavan. And that was when he was simply living as a sadhu on the hill. After Skandashram was built, there was a sadhu who took upon himself to become the manager of the ashram. But because he was trying to boss over people, people didn't like him. So finally, people pushed him aside. And there were a series of managers until finally Chinnaswamy became manager. But this original manager, Perumal Swami, he resented the fact that he had been pushed aside, not by Bhagavan, but by other people. I mean, there was no formal institution at that time. It was, but people just didn't like him, and so they just made it clear they didn't want him bossing over them. But he felt he was the rightful manager of ashram, and he put court cases against Bhagavan. So even Bhagavan, who has least in conflict with anyone, there were people who were in conflict with him. This is just the nature of embodied existence. So we can't live in this world without facing difficulties. And a lot of the difficulties we face are in human relationships. That's why Sadhu Om said, knowing ourselves is easy, living in this world is very difficult. So what is the wise thing to do? To know ourselves and thereby detach ourselves from this body. But let the body live in the world and suffer the consequence of living in the world. Let us not identify ourselves with this body and suffer accordingly. Let us know ourselves.
Okay, the next one. Now, the question comes early on, but there's quite a lot of text here, but I suppose I shouldn't really omit anything. Right. What role does Hindu culture play in the practice? It seems that its role in the teaching is quite unimportant, considering the fact that I'm trying to investigate myself and not the geographical location Venkataraman happened to appear in. Undeniably, Bhagavan's original works do contain cultural references to Hindu terms, but meaning-wise they always transcend local traditions. But the vast majority of texts are globally applicable and bereft of localism. Meanwhile, the life in the ashram and among many devotees elsewhere seems to be running in a pretty Hinduistic manner. Festivals and pujas take place, bhajans are sung, faces get painted. Some Western people, for example, Chadwick, Robert Butler and his wife at one point or another seem to have worn traditional clothes like the locals. From an early age when I attended a Christian school, I found all traditions, both Christian and other, ridiculous in the formal context of this little planet and the vast universe we seem to be experiencing. Now it even seems somewhat sad that we are often divided because of the differences. For a while, 20 years or so, I thought I'd find myself in other more or less traditional schools of thought, but wherever I searched, I found myself an outcast. Even the people who claim to be free from religious or other beliefs often seem to be bound by a particular mixture of Western ideals or the seeming lack of them, and like most of us seem to be bound by their likes and dislikes. I must admit that because of probably unimportant yet existing cultural content I mentioned before, and because of my personality being far from pious and equanimous, I have had thoughts of leaving Ramana's teaching by stopping reading your translations and stopping listening to your explanations. But then I realized that despite my personal traits, neither can I avoid self-remembrance, nor can I forget Ramana's warm glance. It's clear we can investigate oneself no matter what role we play in the world. But still, what do we do with all things related to what we now know as India if we have little or no interest in the cultural background of this location?
it is all that is required is to investigate and know what we actually are. In the 11th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan says, Oruvan tan sarupam adeyam varayal, nirantara swarupa smaranaye, kai patruvanayin, adu andre podam. And until one attains oneself, if one clings firmly to uninterrupted self-remembrance, and that alone is sufficient. So this is all that is necessary. So if you don't, if you're not interested in the cultural context, that is not at all essential. For those, for example, I lived for 20 years in Tiruvannamalai. So like Chadwick and Robert Butler and everyone, it's the natural thing to do when you're living in a hot climate. But the traditional clothes that men wear in South India, the dhoti and a light shirt, it's a natural thing to do. It's the most comfortable form of clothing in the environment. And when you're living in a certain cultural context, you naturally live according to that culture. I lived there for 20 years. Now for more than 20 years, nearly 30 years, I've been away from there. So when I'm in this country, I live I live more or less as according to the culture of this country. That doesn't mean I go to pub and drink and smoke and all these things. But I mean, inwardly, my life is the same. Outwardly, I appear to be no different to anyone else. So the cultural context, these are all secondary things. We should do what comes naturally to us, and we should try. Obviously, if we are living in the West, and if we dress in Indian dress and wear vibhuti and kumkum and everything, we'll stand out. It's better when we're following this path, as far as possible, to be unknown to anyone. So it's we just try to blend in with the surroundings, but at the same time, inwardly, we try to live a pure life. We don't drink or smoke or all these things which are not an essential part of Western culture. There are many people who live in Western culture who don't drink and smoke. So we don't necessarily stand out because, or living a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle. Many people do that. So we don't have to advertise the fact that we're doing this because we're following a spiritual path. We just do it because we don't, just for natural reasons. So as far as possible, we should live our life in a low profile manner, so that we merge into the background of our surroundings without standing out. But inwardly, we try to live a pure life. So the cultural context is secondary. It is not essential. But if you feel an affinity, some of us feel a natural affinity for the many aspects of Indian culture. Of course, in any culture there are good things and bad things, but there are a lot of very good aspects of Indian culture from which we can learn and from which we can be benefited. But these are not essential. So if you don't feel affinity for a culture, it doesn't matter. What you need to feel affinity for is your own being. Who am I? That is what's required. Investigating and knowing what we actually are. And to the extent to which we investigate ourselves, we are thereby surrendering ourselves. So Bhagavan's path is an inward path. So outward forms are just an optional extra, by no means essential. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Thank you, Michael.
So the next question, Please can you go into the extent to which karma goes for the current body? Am I correct in the assumption that everything goes on by karma, including every thought that occurs to us, every decision we make, although choice is an illusion, how others around us interact with us and influence at times?
Sorry, what was the last bit?
Sorry, yeah, it was at the bottom. How others around us interact with us and influence us at times.
Right.
I have read Bhagavan has said that our only real choice is to turn selfward. Also, I have read that Bhagavan has said not to react to what goes on around us. Is this also the only real choice we have? And what we are is choiceless awareness? Question mark.
Yes, well, we're always choicelessly aware. We are always aware, and we have no choice but to be aware. What's important is what we're aware of. But as far as karma is concerned, the word karma simply means action. So whatever actions we do by mind, speech, and body are karma. But there is a law of karma. That is, those actions that we do by mind, speech, and body, under the sway of our vasanas, that means in accordance with our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears, and so on, those actions are called agamya. Agamya are the actions that bear fruit. The fruit of our agamya is not experienced immediately. It gets stored in what is called sanchita. Sanchita simply means a heap or a pile. That is the store of all the fruits of our past karmas, but we haven't yet experienced. And for each life, a selection of both, that is, God selects certain fruit for us to experience as our destiny or prarabdha in this life. So whatever we are given to experience in this life is the fruit of our past actions, but not just a random selection of the fruit of our past action. Those, what we're given to experience in this our life have been selected by God as the most favorable fruit for us to experience for our spiritual progress in this life. So whatever we are given to experience is destined. Whatever we do by mind, speech, or body under the sway of our likes, dislikes, desires, and so on, those are karmas that will create fresh fruit. So we, regarding freedom, we have the most fundamental freedom is either to attend to ourselves or to attend to other things. The wise thing is to attend only to ourselves. But we have the freedom to attend to ourselves. That also means we've got the opposite freedom to attend to other things. Attending to other things is a mental activity. So that is where the action starts. That is, in order to attend to anything other than ourselves, we rise as ego and we allow our attention to go outwards. Thus, we get involved in mental activity. And actions of the mind lead to actions of speech and actions of body. Unless we control ourselves, we sometimes get carried away by our mental actions, and they become physical. They get translated into actions of speech or actions of body. In Bhagavan's path, though Bhagavan taught the law of karma, he didn't teach us the law of karma for us in order for us to be overly concerned about these things. He taught us the law of karma to make us understand that nothing we do can change what we are destined to experience in this lifetime. We are free to want whatever we want. We are free to try to achieve whatever we want, but we are not free to achieve anything unless it is in our destiny. Nor are we free to avoid what is in our destiny. As he said in the note to his mother, what is never to happen will not happen in spite of any amount of effort. What is to happen will not stop in spite of any amount of obstruction. So in other words, what is destined to happen, that's going to happen. That is actually a great blessing for us, because that means we need not concern ourselves about our external life, because it's all going on according to prarabdha. And regarding the actions we need to do in order for our prarabdha to unfold, those actions will be made to do by God. Those actions of mind, speech, and body, but are necessary for the unfoldment of our prarabdha, we will be made to do. So we need not concern ourselves with action. All we need concern ourselves with is attending to our own being. To the extent to which we attend to our own being, we thereby subside. And to the extent we subside, we are thereby not engaging in unnecessary agamya, actions under the sway of our desires. So this is the path Bhagavan has taught us. This is what is called the path of nivritti. That is the path of withdrawal, going back within. That is the opposite of the outward going path, which is called the path of pravritti. So we are not seeking to achieve anything in this world, because whatever we are to achieve in this world, that's already destined. What we are not destined to achieve, we're not going to achieve anyway. So we need not be concerned about our outward life. Our only concern should be turning within and trying to know, who am I? Of course, in order to turn within and try to know what we actually are, requires great love. And for most of us, that love is severely lacking. That's why patient and persistent practice is necessary. The more we try to practice this, the more that love to know and to be what we actually are will increase. So I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
The next question. I'm so long in this group but don't have email of Michael. If it's allowed to share it, please do so. So do you prefer that questions come to the foundation, Michael, and we pass them on, or you?
Yes, I think that's better,
okay?
Because I used to try and answer all the emails I received and all the WhatsApp messages and everything, but I just didn't have time to answer all the questions I was getting. And because I'm trying to do so was preventing me from doing other work, like doing translation work. So I've now, I no longer answer emails and things. But if, for example, someone asked about the paramount importance, I can send that, but whereas I used to have my email address on my website, it's no longer there. So if anyone wants to ask any questions for me to answer during these meetings, they can write to the foundation. If anyone wants to copy of all the installments of the paramount importance as a single PDF, if they write to the foundation, it'll be forwarded on to me and I will then send it. And
or you can even send it to us and we can send it to.
yeah. But actually, I don't know how many. There are about 20 people who have asked in the past for it. So I now have a list of people to whom I send it every month. I mean, every time I create a new installment, I send it to all those who have in the past asked for it. So my email address is not completely secret, but I'm not advertising it in order to try to reduce the number of questions I receive, because I can't, in all honesty. I mean, I simply didn't have time to answer all the questions I was receiving, and it was just taking up too much of my time and preventing me doing anything else.
You just have to make 48 hours into a day. That's all, Michael. That's you have to develop cities.
It's not only the it's also it's it takes a lot of effort, a lot of that is very draining, constantly trying to answer. Because the trouble, one of my problems is when I do something, I want to do it as well as I can.
Yes.
And I'm possibly a little bit too over conscientious, so it was just draining my energy. So because as the body gets older, we can't continue working as we used to work in the past. So I'm just
and
trying to
your health is not,
reduce
it's not
things.
perfect. Yeah. Right.
So I'm sorry. I apologize to the foundation for taking advantage of you in this way, but
that's fine. The next is not really a question, but I'll read it anyway, and you can comment if you want. Ego is not evolutionary, but wants to experience itself as evolutionary.
Ego is the root of evolution. Ego is the root of everything. And all ego is always identifying itself with its own products, the things that it has projected. I am this body. This is my country, my religion, my culture, my this, my that.
We have yet to see you in a kilt, Michael.
Yes.
Right. The next question. I wanted to ask Michael if he ever knew something about Swami Abhishektananda, Henri Le Sceau, who met Bhagavan in January 49, and what Bhagavan told about him. Thank you so much. Om Namah Ramanaya.
As far as I know, Bhagavan didn't say anything about him. Bhagavan generally didn't comment on people, on visitors. So, and by the late 1940s, so many people were coming. I've heard of Abhishektananda. I think once I read some. I've never read any of his books completely, but I think I read about what his account of coming to Bhagavan. But I don't know a lot about him.
Yeah, we have that book actually when he describes his coming there. I think it's a slim book. Something about Arunachala.
Yeah.
Do you remember the name?
He was a Benedictine monk,
Yes.
but he was very much attracted to Advaita philosophy. So, but I think he tries to. He writes. I think he writes a lot about Hindu-Christian meeting point of the heart or something.
He visited Gnanananda, I think, as well, didn't he?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah, okay. So, next question. What did Bhagavan say about Nishkarma Karma? Also, when one is deeply immersed in action, in a type of flow rate where there is no sense of time, and where the action is being performed perfectly and effortlessly, are we experiencing a temporary subsidence of ego?
As far as the latter question, I mean, the last question is concerned, a flow state is not a state without time. The very word flow implies movement in time. It is. I think a flow state, it's a state in which, I don't know, I find the concept a bit vague, but whatever it is, there is an I that is experiencing that state. Some people say it's a state in which there's no ego. But if there's no ego, there's no experience, because the experiencer is ego. So whoever experiences such a state, that which is the experiencer of any experience is ego. Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
What did Bhagavan say about Nishkarma Karma?
Oh, yes. Bhagavan has referred to Nishkarmiya Karma in verses 3 to 7 of Upadesha Undiyar. In verse 2, he says that action cannot give liberation, because though the fruit of action passes away, it remains as a seed, and the seed is what causes us to fall in the great ocean of action. In other words, action is self-perpetuating. The seeds he refers to there are the vasanas. So when we do an action, there are two types of results. There is the fruit, which is what what gets stored in Sanchita, may later be allotted it to experience it as part of our prarabdha. But there's also the seed. That is the driving force behind any action is the vasanas. When we allow ourselves to be swayed by any vasana, we are thereby strengthening that vasana. So the more we do a certain action, the more inclination we will have to do that action. So even though the fruit of action is temporary and passes away, the seeds remain and perpetuate the whole cycle of action. So that's what he says in verse 2. So from verse 3, he begins talking about nishkarmiya karma. So what he says in verse 3 is nishkarmiya karma done for God will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. What he means by that, nishkarmiya karma, means action that is done without desire for any fruit. So you're just doing action just for God, not for any result you can get from it. Doing it for God implies doing it for the love of God. So if you do action just for the love of God, without expecting any result, any benefit thereby, that is nishkarmiya karma. And that will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. What does he mean by purify the mind? That means to remove the impurities. So what are the impurities? The impurities are the vasanas. So the vasanas are the inclinations to do actions in order to experience the results of those actions. So, but if we act without, of course, we can't act totally without desire. As Bhagavan said, Atma-jnani alone can be a good karma yogi. But we can, to some extent, act not desiring the fruit, but just for the love of God. And those actions will purify the mind, that is, they'll reduce the strength of our Vishaya vasanas. And Vishaya vasanas is what also called karma vasanas, because of our desire to experience Vishayas, objects of phenomena, we do action. So karma vasanas and Vishaya vasanas in effect are the same. So when the mind is purified, it is also clarified. And that in the clear mind, the way to liberation will become clear. That's why he says it will show the way to liberation. But the way to liberation is not any karma, it's not any action, but is only just being. And in order to just be, we need to turn our attention within and thereby subside. So, as I say, in verse 3, he says, the nishkarmiya karma, done for the love of God, done for God, will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. Then in the next verse, he begins to discuss what are the types of nishkarmiya karma we can do. We have three instruments of action: mind, speech, and body. So he deals with each of these. He says, this is certain: puja, japa, and dhyana are respectively actions of body, speech, and mind. And one is superior to one. What he means by one is superior to one is that in this order, each is superior to the other one. That is, better than puja, the action done by body, is japa. Better than japa is dhyana. And when he says it's better or superior, what he means is it's more efficacious in purifying the mind. Because the benefit of nishkarmiya karma is purification of mind. So the actions you do by body, the puja, will purify the mind to some extent. More than that, the japa will purify. More than that, the dhyana will purify. And then in the next 3 verses, he deals with each of these in turn. In verse 5, he says, and remember, though he's just talking about puja, japa, and dhyana, the implication is nishkamya puja, nishkamya japa, nishkamya dhyana. Because many people who do puja, japa, and dhyana are not doing it nishkamya. They're doing it for some result. If you're doing it for some result, then it's not nishkamya. So he's talking only about the nishkamya puja, japa, and dhyana. So in verse 5, he says, that is, there's a concept in Shaiva Siddhanta that Shiva has 8 forms. The 8 forms of Shiva are the 5 elements. That is space, air, fire, water, and earth. These are the 5 elements that constitute everything. The gross form constitute all the material form. The subtle form of these elements constitute all the mental states and everything. So everything is constituted of these 5 elements. And then that's 5. The other 3 are they're slightly different enumerations in different texts, but it's usually said to be sun, moon, and jiva. Jiva means living being. So these are called the 8 forms of Shiva. In other words, everything is a form of Shiva. So he says, worshipping, considering all the 8 forms to be forms of God, is good worship of God. This is a very broad definition of puja. Usually puja is associated with ritualistic worship. But this definition Bhagavan gives broadens it. It's if you are doing any action just for the love of God, with the attitude that everything is God. So, for example, if you see a hungry person and you give them food, but not when you give that hungry person food, you shouldn't be feeling, oh, I'm superior, I'm giving to this inferior person. No, you should consider that that person is, God has come in the form of that person, and you are given you are blessed with the opportunity to serve them. If you do in that way, that doing that service to that person, that is a good puja. If you do it with that attitude, if you do it considering that person to be God, if you try to live an eco-friendly lifestyle, considering the whole world to be a form of God, and therefore not wanting to do harm to the world as it is, that is also good worship of God. So Bhagavan gives a very broad definition of puja. He doesn't limit it just to ritualistic worship. Any action you do by body, considering everything to be God, is good worship of God. Then in the next verse 6, he talks about japa. And he says, this verse is put in a very terse form, so I'll put it in a more expanded way, because otherwise it's not very clear what it means. The implication is, better than singing hymns of praise is doing japa. Better than doing japa aloud is doing japa softly within the mouth. Better than doing japa softly within the mouth is doing mental japa. And that mental japa is a form of dhyana. That is the implication. When he says better than, again, it means more efficacious in purifying the mind. Japa, for those who don't know, japa means repetition of the name of God. In this context, it can mean repetition of any mantra, but since Bhagavan is talking about the nishkamya karma done for the love of God, it implies japa of the name of God. So that is more effective than the puja. And then in the verse 7, he says, that's the verse about dhyana, he says, better than dhyana that is interrupted is uninterrupted dhyana, like the pouring of ghee or the flow of a river. In other words, why he says that is, if you sit to meditate on God, and after meditating on God for a few minutes or a few moments, you begin to think of other things, your meditation on God is thereby interrupted. Why is your meditation interrupted? Because you're more interested in thinking about those other things than you are in thinking about God. So if you meditate on God without interruption, that indicates the degree of love you have for God. So uninterrupted meditation is better than interrupted meditation. So all these are actions. The puja is action of body. The japa is action of speech. Japa or singing stotras is action of speech. And dhyana, meditation, is action of mind. These are all karmas. But if you're doing it without desire for the fruit, that's nishkamya, just for the love of God, these actions will purify the mind. When the mind is sufficiently purified, you get the clarity to understand that we cannot know God by any amount of action, because what God actually is pure being. We can't know being by doing. In order to know being, we need to be as we actually are. So in the 8th verse, he leaves aside, or the 8th verse is where he transitions from their karma, nishkarmiya karma, to the state of just being. What he says in verse 8 is, rather than anya bhava, ananya bhava, in which he is I, is best among all. Anya means other. Ananya means not other. So anya bhava in this context implies meditation on God as something other than ourselves. In other words, meditation on a name or form of God. So rather than that, meditation on God as not other implies not other than ourselves. And he clarifies that by saying, in which he is I. So with the understanding that God is what is shining in our heart as I, if we meditate on nothing other than I, that is best among all. Whereas meditating on anything other than ourselves, even on a name or form of God, is an action. Meditating on I is not an action, it's a cessation of action. Because to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, attend to I, we thereby subside. So in the next verse, verse 9, he says, Bhava balatinal bhavanatita sat bhava tirutalayundipara parabhakti tattvamundipara. That is, bhava balatina means by the strength of meditation. The meditation implied here is the ananya bhava that he talked about in the previous verse. Ananya bhava means meditating on nothing other than I. In other words, self-attentiveness. So by the strength of self-attentiveness, bhavanatita sat bhava tirutale, being in the state of being which transcends bhavana. Bhavana here implies meditation on anything other than ourselves, which is a mental activity. So being in the state of just being, which transcends all mental activity, that is parabhakti tattva. That is the very nature of supreme devotion. Because when it's very important to understand the meaning of this verse, because what he implies here is, by the strength of self-attentiveness, what happens? We subside and thereby remain in the state of being. So we go beyond all mental activity. So this is not attending to ourselves is not an action, it's just a state of a cessation of action. The result of a cessation of action is this being in the state of being, and that is supreme devotion, because that is the state of complete surrender, the state in which we give ourselves wholly to God. So from 3 to 7, he was talking about nishkarmiya karma. From in 8 and 9, he goes beyond nishkarmiya karma to to bring about a cessation of all action. We bring about a cessation of all action by attending only to ourselves. And by attending to ourselves, all action ceases, that the ego subsides, therefore all action ceases, and we thereby remain in the state of being. And being in that state of being, that is Parabhakti Tattva. So that's what Bhagavan taught us about Nishkarmiya Karma. What is Nishkarmiya Karma and where it leads? So it is clear from these verses, but that is all of these verses from 3 to 9, they're all talking about the path of bhakti. Up to verse 7, it's talking about bhakti to God as something other than ourselves. The devotion to God as something other than ourselves. By that devotion, the mind is purified and we get the clarity to understand that God cannot be, that I cannot be anything other than God. So God is most intimately present in me as my own being. So meditating on nothing other than my own being, that is the best among all, as he says in verse 8. So that is going beyond the nishkarmiya karma to the state of subsiding. And that is, by that strength of that self-attentiveness, we thereby remain in the state of being, and that is the Parabhakti Tattva. So the Nishkarmiya karma gives us it purifies the mind and thereby gives us the clarity to understand that the way to liberation is not to attend to anything other than ourselves, but to attend to ourself alone, and thereby subside back into the state of being, which is God himself. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
And he follows on with, which is relevant, of course, to what he said before. What would be the response to a theist who would be skeptical of non-duality and the idea that one's own true self is God, as they would say that a gnani like Bhagavan is clearly not omnipotent, omniscient, nor omnipresent, all attributes they would associate with God?
Most theists worship God in a name and form. The form of God is, if you take God, for example, if we take Krishna to be God, that form is not, it seems to be not omnipresent. It also seems to be, because it's a human form, it seems to be lacking in power. But actually, whether it's Krishna or Ramakrishna or Bhagavan Ramana, though they appear in name and form, that is not what they actually are. That is because we mistake ourselves to be a body, we mistake God to be, or God or Guru to be that body. But what God actually is the infinite whole. So Bhagavan Ramana or Bhagavan Krishna or Bhagavan Rama or Bhagavan Ramakrishna, all are just that one infinite reality. There is no, that is, the differences is in the names and forms, but the underlying reality is one. Regarding answers to theists, if theists don't want to accept the truth of non-duality, it's not our job to try and convince them, because at different stages of spiritual development, different views will appeal to us. So some people are more attracted to, some people like, for example, Dvaita. They like to think God is wholly separate. Or some people like Vishishta Dvaita. Vishishta Dvaita is very nice because it's a nice midway house. God is not entirely separate, but we are not entirely one with God. That is, there's non-duality, but it's qualified. That's a sort of midway house. And then Advaita is well, from our point of view, Advaita is the ultimate. If a theist is interested in Advaita and asks us about it, how can you say that you are one with God? If they're asking with an interest to learn, not just because I mean, many theists, they dislike Advaita because they misunderstand Advaita. But if someone genuinely wants to learn, we can explain, is not God infinite? Even the most ardent theists, generally all theists will agree God is infinite, because if God is not infinite, then he's limited, he's finite, and then he's not the greatest of all. So most theists will agree that God is infinite. Then it's very easy to come to Advaita, because if God is infinite, nothing can be other than him. If anything is other than God, then God is thereby limited. So since nothing is other than, since God is infinite, nothing can be other than God. So we cannot be other than God, therefore God must be our own reality. It's very easy to reason towards non-duality, but we should do so only if people really want to know. We are not here to try and convert people or to convince people. Many people, good people, very devoted, pious people, for them, Advaita seems very, they find the idea of Advaita very threatening. But actually, there's also a very widespread idea, but in Advaita, there's no room for bhakti. Because if you're saying you're one with God, how can you be devoted to God? What they overlook is the fact that we all, as Bhagavan pointed out, we all have greatest love for ourselves. When we are saying that we are one with God, we are not saying, but I, Michael, am God. That would be absurd, because Michael is a limitation. I, bereft of Michael, that is God. That is the pure I. I, bereft of all upadis or adjuncts, that is God, as Bhagavan explains in verses 24 and 25 of Upadesha Undiyar. In the Irakamekayal Isa Jivagal Oruporleava Undipara Upadi Unave Verundipara. That is in their by being nature, that is in their essential being, God and soul are just one substance, one reality. The awareness of adjuncts alone is different. That is, because we mistake ourselves to be a set of adjuncts, we seem to be something separate from God. But that is not what we actually are. What we are, in our true being, we are nothing other than God. So he goes on in the next verse to say, knowing oneself without adjuncts is itself knowing God, because God shines as oneself. So actually, even among Advaitins, there are some Advaitins who look down on bhakti. They don't, because those who think bhakti and Advaita are somehow different or opposed haven't truly understood either, because the very heart of Advaita is bhakti, and the flowering of bhakti is Advaita. So there's absolutely no conflict between bhakti and Advaita. When bhakti reaches its fruition, when we surrender ourselves completely to God, what remains is Advaita.
And Bhagavan gave so much attention to his mother's samadhi and the worship and pujas there as well.
Well, that was more Bhagavan's brother who was interested in those things, but Bhagavan exemplified the path of bhakti through Arunachal Stuti Panchakam. And he constantly emphasized bhakti is the mother of jnana. Because when we turn our attention within to know who am I, we thereby subside. So until we are willing to subside, until we are willing to surrender ourselves completely, we will not be willing to turn within. So without all-consuming love, following this path of self-investigation is impossible. Of course, we don't have all-consuming love yet, but we need to have at least some love, some willingness to surrender ourselves before we can begin on this path. If we have no willingness to surrender ourselves, we just will not attend to ourselves, because to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we thereby subside. So this Atma-vichara is the culmination of the path of surrender. We can surrender ourselves completely only by investigating ourselves. Bhagavan made that very clear. So Bhagavan gave central importance to bhakti, both explicitly and implicitly.
When the temple was being constructed, I believe he used to look around at the construction when no one was there to see how the stones were being shaped and all that. Now, how are you doing, Michael? We've got a couple more questions.
Okay, let's finish them.
Go with them. All right.
Yeah.
Next one. In order to turn within, the mind must be turned away from the world and focused on oneself. Does this not require willpower, at least in the beginning? What is the role of willpower in the practice of self-inquiry? Annamalai Swami once mentioned that if the self-inquiry practice is not done continuously, 24/7, some of the past efforts go to waste and the mind regains all its power back. This sounds a bit discouraging. Is that so? Thank you.
Bhagavan made it very clear, no effort made in this path goes to waste. Every little effort we make to attend to ourselves has a cumulative effect. But we need, Bhagavan also emphasized the need for perseverance. Our aim should be to try to attend to ourselves always. We may fail, but every moment that we attend to ourselves, we are making progress towards that state when we are attending to ourselves all the time. Regarding willpower, rather than thinking in terms of willpower, it's better to think in terms of love. We need great love to attend to ourselves, because as I explained, attending to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as ego thereby subside. So attending to ourselves is itself surrender. So in order to surrender ourselves, we need great love to do so. So yeah, we can call that love willpower, but it's willpower rather implies it implies a sort of determination. It's a more appropriate way of describing it is to say love. We require great love in order to surrender ourselves completely. And if we're not ready to, only to the extent to which we're willing to surrender ourselves, we have love to surrender ourselves, only to that extent will we be able to attend to ourselves. Because when we attend to ourselves, we let go of everything else and we begin to subside. So we simply won't be willing to do so without love. So the extent to which we attend to ourselves is the measure of the love that we have. And as Bhagavan said, that's by the strength of that self-attentiveness, being in the state of being, which transcends all mental activity, is the very nature of supreme devotion, parabhakti tattva.
next question.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
This doubt about whether the effort we make can go to waste. Arjuna also asked this same question to Krishna. If we make effort in this life, but we don't reach the goal, what will happen to us then? Is it all wasted? And Krishna says, no. If even though this body comes to an end, in the next life, you'll be born in a favorable circumstances to continue this path, is the implication. Krishna didn't say it in quite those words, but that's the implication. And Bhagavan was very, very clear about this. Every little effort we make to attend to ourselves, that is, Bhagavan said, every little effort we make to attend to ourselves is more valuable than any amount of time spent in doing any other type of sadhana, puja, japa, or dhyana. This is the most effective. It is the best among all. So we shouldn't think that we can, but the effort we make will ever go to waste. The more we practice this, the more love we will cultivate to continue practicing it. And when the love is strong enough, we will then finally be willing to surrender ourselves completely. And that is when we'll be able to turn within the full 180 degrees.
Next, another one popped up actually, but next one. Was it Bhagavan who identified the connection between the biblical and the Bible and Advaita in the statement, I am that I am?
Yes, Bhagavan. But what God, that is in that the context in which God said, I am that I am, Moses asked God, that is, God said that Moses should go and go to a Pharaoh and say that he should release his people and take them out of Egypt. Or he should go to his people. I can't remember exactly what it was. But anyway, Moses asked God, who should I say has sent me? And God replies, I am that I am. Say that I am has sent you. So God is revealing that his true name is I am. And Bhagavan often used the term in whether in Tamil or in Sanskrit. In Tamil, it was nan nan. In Sanskrit, aham aham. This term has often been translated as I, but that is a mistranslation. In both Tamil and Sanskrit, if you have a sentence that consists of a subject and a subject complement, like I am this body, you don't have to say I am. Nan ideham. I, this body, means I am this body. Nan a, I who, means I am who am I? So the am is understood in such a sentence. So when Bhagavan says nan nan or aham aham, he means I am I. That is who am I? I am only I. I'm nothing other than I. So it's that is one of Bhagavan's central teachings, and that is what is also implied by I am that I am. The exact meaning of the original Hebrew has been debated by scholars for thousands of years, literally. In the earliest translation of the Hebrew Old Testament was the translation into Greek, which was done before the time of Christ. And in that translation, they translated it as I am the being. What makes it a bit difficult is the word that is usually translated as that or what. I am what I am, or I am that I am. That is it's the linguists refer to it as a relativizer. it's a bit similar to a relative pronoun in English, but it's not exactly the same. I think what it means, what I understand it means, is what God said is, what the meaning of what is in the Hebrew is, I am is what I am. That's why he goes on to say that I am has sent you. So the clear implication is that God is saying, I am I. I am, I am. I am is what I am. That is exactly what Bhagavan means when he says nan nan or aham aham. And that is actually a greater Mahavakya than Bhagavan said. This is the greatest of all the Mahavakyas, because the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads are aham brahmasmi, tattvamasi, I am Atma Brahman, prajnanam Brahman. That is, aham brahmasmi means I am Brahman. Tattvamasi, you are that. I am Atma Brahman means this self is Brahman. And prajnanam Brahman means awareness is Brahman. So all these Mahavakyas are indicating that the oneness of the Jiva Brahmaikya, the oneness of Jiva and Brahman. But what Jiva and Brahman essentially are is one. But so long as we use a word like Brahman, it suggests something other than ourselves. That is the reason for the Mahavakyas in the Upanishads. Generally, we take God or Brahman to be something other than ourselves, and therefore seek it outside ourselves, to make us understand that what we are seeking is not something other than us, outside ourselves or other than ourselves, but within ourselves. It's ourself alone. These Mahavakyas are there. But if we begin to think, I am Brahman, we are identifying ourselves with something that seems to be other than ourselves. Whereas in the case of I am I, there's only I and nothing other than I. Who am I? I am I, nothing other than I. Since that I is Brahman, that's true, but it's a deeper truth to say I am I than I am Brahman. Because in I am Brahman, there's seemingly two things. There's I am Brahman. Of course, I am Brahman is stating that they're one thing, but it's deeper, more practical to understand who am I? I am nothing other than I.
And even the message that was given by Madonna to Bernadette was, I am the Immaculate Conception.
Yes, yes. That also has the same, we can understand it as having the same implication. I am is the Immaculate Conception. That is the purest of all. It's not even really a conception, because it's God itself. So it's the primal reality is I am.
So the last question, could you please speak a bit more about how to practice bhakti? And is it something that can be practiced, or does it manifest of itself?
Bhakti means devotion, which implies love. There are many different ways to practice bhakti. But if it's true bhakti, it has to be nishkamya. Because if we are worshipping God, if we are practicing devotion to God for what we can get from God, then our devotion is to what we can get from God, not for God. God is a means to an end. So in nishkamya bhakti, God is the end himself. We don't want anything other than God himself. So the true bhakti marga begins with when it becomes nishkamya. When we are not seeking to gain anything from God. We want God alone, nothing other than God. And in order to get God, we have to give ourselves to God. So we surrender. And I spoke about this earlier, what Bhagavan explains about the different ways of expressing our love for God through puja, japa, and dhyana, and each is more effective than the other. But the best way to express our love for God is to give ourselves entirely to God. And how can we give ourselves entirely to God? Since the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than itself, but to subside and dissolve back into its source by attending to itself, in order to surrender ourselves, in order to surrender ourselves completely, we need to stop attending to anything other than ourselves and attend only to ourselves. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we thereby subside. That subsidence of ego is surrender. So the best way to practice the bhakti is by vichara. By attending to ourselves, we thereby subside and remain in the state of being, which, as Bhagavan says in verse 9 of Upadeshundiya, being in that state of being, by the strength of self-attentiveness, is parabhakti tattva. That is the tattva, the nature or the truth of supreme devotion. That is supreme devotion. So there are many different ways we can practice bhakti. Bhakti simply, essentially, bhakti means love. So there are different ways we can express our love for God, but the best way to express our love for God is to give ourselves wholly to God. And we can give ourselves wholly to God only by ceasing to rise as ego. So we now come back to what I was talking about at the beginning. As Bhagavan says in verse 27 of Napadu, Nanudiyada ulla nilai, Namaduvai ulla nilai. The state in which I is without rising is the state in which we are that. That is the supreme devotion. Because what better way to love God than to be God? To cease rising as ego and just be as we actually are. Since God is what we actually are, being as we actually are is the supreme devotion. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.